Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're actually diving into a pretty wild intersection of law, philosophy, and hard network science. It all circles around one huge question. Can a single retweet from an everyday user, an edge node, actually cause systemic social chaos? It sounds crazy, right? But this is the exact mystery at the heart of the Chen Jingwan cyber speech case. We're going to neutrally examine the evidence here, because the legal stakes are absolutely massive when a private citizen's single online click gets blamed for a large-scale real-world disruption.
So our goal today is to run a really rigorous stress test on this specific legal hypothesis. We're going to systematically break down the prosecution's claims in the Chen Jingwen case. And to do that, we're bringing out the heavy hitters: classical philosophy, complex network science, and foundational legal theory. It's just a brilliant way to see if a legal argument actually holds water when you subject it to intense, multidisciplinary scrutiny. Let's see how this hypothesis actually holds up under the microscope.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our game plan for the stress test. First, the core causal dispute. Second, the philosophical audit. Third, the scientific audit. And finally, number 4, the final verdict.
Starting right off with Section 1, the core causal dispute. Nulla, Poena, Sine, Causa. To really wrap our heads around the prosecution's charge of picking quarrels by forwarding posts, we have to start at the absolute bedrock of criminal liability. Nulla Poena Sine Causa. It's Latin for no cause, no responsibility. Basically, it means that for any conviction to be legally valid, the prosecution has to prove a direct, undeniable link between a specific act, like hitting the forward button on a social media app, and the resulting harm, which in this case is alleged public chaos. Without that proven causal link, well, there's simply no valid legal responsibility, no objective imputation at all.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core tension of the whole case. On one hand, you have the prosecution's linear model. They're essentially arguing that event A, the retweet, strictly and mechanically causes event B, the social chaos. Boom, straight line. But on the other hand, we have the reality of how complex systems actually work on the modern internet. In a digital network with literally over 1 billion users, a systemic outcome is never just linear. It's a massive, swirling function of millions of interacting variables, algorithms, platform architectures, and giant data hubs. So we have to ask, is it scientifically or legally accurate to draw a straight, isolated line from one tiny edge node all the way to a systemic failure?
Which brings us to Section 2, the philosophical audit. Hume and Lewis.
Let's test this linear legal claim against some classical philosophy, starting with David Hume's regularity theory. Hume famously argued that we can't just observe some magical causal force floating around in the air. Instead, causation requires what he called a constant conjunction. Think of it as a superstable observable pattern where event A happens, and it is repeatedly, predictably, and consistently followed by event B. So if we apply this to our explainer today, is there a stable, repeated pattern when an internet account with fewer than 100 followers forwards a post, and it constantly always results in a society-wide crisis?
Well, when we actually apply Hume's theory to the facts of the case, the whole argument just completely falls apart. There is literally zero historical precedent of an account with under 100 followers single-handedly triggering severe public chaos. There is a total lack of constant conjunction. I mean, think about it. Millions of regular everyday users forward posts every single day, and society doesn't collapse into chaos, right? Because of that, under Hume's theory, the prosecution's link isn't based on empirical fact. It's really just based on a psychological fiction, basically an assumption or a fear.
Let's move to our second philosophical pillar and see how this builds. This is David Lewis's counterfactual theory, which lawyers generally know as the but-for test. It's pretty straightforward. Event A is the cause of event B if, and only if, had A not occurred, B would not have occurred. To figure this out, we have to run a little thought experiment and compare the real world to a hypothetical counterfactual world. So I want you to ask yourself this really intuitive question. If this individual had never retweeted those specific posts, would the public order of the entire society have been any different? Looking at the source documents, the answer is unequivocally no. In a decentralized, incredibly massive digital network, removing one tiny micro-action from an edge node doesn't change the macro state of the system at all. The world would look exactly the same. The retweet just isn't a necessary condition for the state of public order. And that successfully and totally debunks the causal necessity required by the law.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 3, the scientific audit, network science. Philosophy gives us the solid logic, but empirical math is what completely dismantles the whole butterfly effect myth here.
We can break down network science across 3 distinct scales to see exactly why. First, we have micro-level extinction. Second, meso-level structural isolation. And third, macro-level self-organized criticality. Let's walk through what each of these actually means for how information moves.
Now, what's really interesting here is this mathematical expression, mu is less than 1. This represents something called the Galton-Watson branching process. In network science, mu is basically the average reproduction number of a piece of information. Basically, how many new people will share a post after seeing it. If mu is less than 1, which, let's be real, is definitely the case for a regular social media account with virtually no active followers, the extinction theorem mathematically guarantees that the transmission chain is going to die out almost immediately. A single retweet from an edge node just fizzles out. It's literally like dropping a single match into a vast empty desert. Nothing happens.
And when we zoom out to the meso and macro levels, the reality of network science becomes even more obvious. Large digital platforms are what we call scale-free networks. They rely on massive hub accounts to spread information widely. Edge nodes, regular users with very few connections, are structurally isolated from all of that. The network itself is highly robust to their noise. So if systemic chaos does actually occur, the principle of self-organized criticality tells us it's an internal macro-level generation. It's caused by massive system pressure, not one little edge node. Blaming a single retweet for a societal crisis, it's completely absurd. It would be exactly like blaming a single pedestrian crossing the street for causing a citywide traffic jam.
Which brings us to our final section, number 4, the final verdict. Law meets science.
So, the crucial point is this. When we synthesize everything from our stress test, the findings are crystal clear. Under Hume's theory, we found no observable pattern of a retweet causing chaos. The counterfactual test, the world remains exactly the same without the retweet. And network science, it proved it is physically and mathematically impossible for an isolated edge node to trigger a systemic avalanche. Therefore, when we bring it all back to the legal standard of objective imputation we talked about earlier, we find that the causal chain is completely broken across every single evaluated dimension.
The source documents give us this incredibly powerful summary quote, and it hits the nail right on the head. In a complex system, an edge node's weak forwarding behavior cannot cause systemic chaos. Because this assumed causal link is demonstrably false under both philosophical logic and hard scientific physics, that foundational legal requirement of objective imputation fails entirely. You simply cannot be held legally responsible for an outcome that your actions didn't and mathematically couldn't cause.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. As we navigate an increasingly complex, hyper-connected digital world, is it time to stop applying 19th century mechanical models of causation to 21st century complex networks? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this structured breakdown has given you a powerful new framework for understanding the profound intersection of law, philosophy, and network science. Keep questioning everything and keep learning.